Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of the House Science and Technology Committee meetings. We are very fortunate this morning that we have as our presenter Mr. Tino Montella, who is president of the Technology Association of Georgia. I realize that some people are in meetings, everything from the huddle that started at 7:30 instead of 8 o'clock this morning, to a prayer group. So they may be straggling in a little bit late. So, Mr. Montella, if you'll forgive us, we'd love for you to get started. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm pleased to be here again this year. I think I've done this for a few years now, and what I typically do, and I want this to be informal, open up to any questions you have as we go along or at the end, certainly. But this is our sneak preview of the State of the Industry Report on March 23rd, and you're all invited. I've asked Richie to make sure that you get an invite. We have our Georgia Technology Summit. We'll have about 1,000 people there, and I'll have a chance to spend about 15 or 20 minutes giving our State of the Industry Report at that time as well. The document is actually about 300 pages, all kinds of good information. I've spared you about 290 of the pages today, maybe 280 of the pages today. There's a few more than 10 in here. But I tried to pick out what we're focused on is our top 10 findings, because we think that'll be most interest to you. And as a precursor to this, I'd say that some of them are good news, and some of them are areas that we need to work on. Okay, this was, oh, there it goes, okay. That's me. TAG, just real quickly on TAG, Technology Association of Georgia. We're probably now the largest technology association, trade association in the United States. We just crossed 12,000 members. We have 12,100 members. 6 years ago, just to give you a comparative, we had 1,400 members. So I think that speaks to the industry and the good job that our team's doing at TAG. We focus on a number of things. One is we feel like we own the connecting space. We have 170 meetings a year. About 15,000 people go to those meetings. It's opportunities for them to exchange knowledge, thought leadership, network, and it's everybody from the big companies to people that are in transition, and it's a real great atmosphere. Typically, there's not a day that goes by during the weekdays anyways that there's not a TAG activity going on. In addition to being the connecting organization, we conduct major events, and that's a place for us to celebrate and recognize all the good things that are happening with technology. So at the summit, for example, we recognize the top 40 innovative technology companies. Then in addition to that, we're an information repository. We do the State Industry Report. We do primary research. We do webinars, and so on and so forth. As we've matured as an organization, we've been around since 1998. Some people remember organizations that were part of TAG that were around well before that. We're moving towards driving the tech-based economy here in Georgia. That's, I think, as I said, as we mature, it's important that we do more for the state, and our goal is to have technology be a robust part of what goes on here. And then we have a charity called TAG Education Collaborative, and their goal is to get high school students and middle school students engaged and excited about science, technology, engineering, and math. So, and that program's called our TAG Education Collaborative. The report's made possible each year by sponsors. These are sponsors that support us. And here's the organization that has done the detailed research, and they've done a great job with that. We tell them what we need to find, and they help us to find it. The report includes a number of different things. You can take a look. And again, if the report will be on our website, but after March 23rd, we'd be happy to make the entire report available. So moving to the 10 findings, one of the things we did is primary research this year. We do it each year. And we surveyed about 150 respondents to our survey here in Georgia, mostly CIOs of mid-size, small and large companies, and CEOs, founders of companies, and the findings were interesting. And one of the things it showed us is technology sector, and of course you're all preaching to the choir here today, but the technology sector is poised to lead the state of Georgia out of the economic recession into the economic recovery. And there's already signs of that. As I meet with our technology leaders, we see that there's people that are hiring, companies that are growing here. And here's what they told us. So if you look at this first slide, we found that 70% of the respondents said that the workforce would increase, their workforce, so their company workforce would increase over the course of the next 12 months. 82% projected increases over the next 5 years. So some could say, you know, these are people that are in the field, they're optimistic, so you have to weigh that into consideration. But those are really significant findings. They also said that their technology purchasing would go up this year. And we're seeing that already with hardware and software, with staffing, particularly with contract staffing. We have a lot of staffing augmentation companies here in this area, and many of them are doing extremely well right now. Second finding is, while Georgia is still not getting its fair share of venture capital, Q4 ended the year much better than Q409, which in some degree isn't saying too much because Q409 was fairly much a disaster. But the venture capital, as you look at this, our big heyday year, and the chairman and others have seen this report before, but this shows that 2000, that was when people were investing in all kinds of things. Some people say vaporware to some degree, but there's over $2 billion spent on a venture investment here in Georgia alone. Since that time, we've flattened out for sure. We're up a little bit from 2009 to 2010, so that's a good sign. But the whole venture capital world is contracting. There's some mergers, acquisitions, companies that are going out of business. So a bit of an uptick is a good thing. But I can tell you that our technology companies in Georgia just simply feel, and it's a reality, that there's not enough venture investment here. There's not enough venture capital firms. I was out visiting Salt Lake City, Utah, my counterpart in Utah. And Utah actually has pretty strong technology sector and growing. And they created a fund-to-fund through their state a number of years ago. I think it was a $400 million fund. And they were able, through that, to establish a number of different venture firms who are now investing in the Utah technology sector. And frankly, they're pulling some of the companies that want to leave California into a state that's close by. So there's a dynamic going on there. We need work. Right now, California still gets about 50% of the total venture investment in the United States, and Georgia is slightly under 2%, which is up a little bit, in fact, from about 1.5%. So we've made a little bit of progress. This shows over the last few quarters where we stand, and that shows both the size of the investment and also the number of investments. So if you look at Q4, just to read that, it's $100 million in investment, and that was 12 investments. So that says that the deal size was larger, and some of the companies are growing because of that. I saw in the paper just this last week that Suniva announced a $15 million investment here in a company called Vitru, which is in the social media space. I think had a $17 million investment. Much of that investment is not from Georgia. So one of the challenges we have with that is, it just makes logical sense, if your investors are from California or Boston, you as a company may have to go there if you want that money. They don't want to be flying back and forth to Atlanta from Boston or San Francisco to do investment. Here's how our investments stack up. We are still a major software state. We are focusing, and we're encouraged. I don't have a lot on this today, but we have done a lot of work on where Georgia leads. And let me just take a second to talk about that, because I think it's important that we want to encourage both the public and the private side to think about our clusters, because clusters, these vertical clusters, when you can establish enough companies, enough girth in a particular area, there's a lot of potential to grow those clusters. And oftentimes, I think, historically, the state, I'm focused on the state because we're here today, but the state may go after those things that are sexy, but not necessarily where we have a leadership position. And if you remember Jack Walsh and the old GE model, he said, if you're not number 1 or 2, maybe you shouldn't be in the business. And we don't necessarily say that here. We say, wow, that looks like a good rainbow to chase. Let's go after that. But where we lead, we're number 1 in the nation in health IT. We have over 135 companies in that area and growing. And so how do we maintain that position? We're 3rd in the nation in fintech, financial technologies. And NCR, First Data, as you know, have just moved their headquarters here. We have Global Payments. We have TSYS in Columbus. We have still a major presence at CheckFree. It's now Fiserv. We're strong in information security. We're in the top 5 in that area. IT communication, we're strong in that, and software. So those are 5 areas where we have a critical mass, and we need to think about how we can support those areas and help those companies that are here to grow. The chairman of First Data at the time, Michael, I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong, Kalopoulos, that's not the exact pronunciation, but he said at a meeting of the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber that the reason the First Data moved their headquarters here was because there was a major concentration of fintech companies here, which meant that you could look more for talent, you could build on each other's strengths. Even though there's competition in some areas, there's also cooperation. So there's a lot of opportunities here. But software is one of our strong areas, and you see most of the investments are there. Third point is corporate investments in Georgia technology sector are strong in new production capacity, research facilities, and headquarters. And this is a good sign that in 2010, technology companies announced plans to invest more than $1 billion in Georgia, which means 5,000 new jobs. And if you look at some of these, I don't know if the audience can totally see it here, but you have areas, none of the ones we listed are actually in the metropolitan Atlanta area. We have Gulfstream in Savannah that announced a $500 million investment, which will mean 1,000 jobs, and a number of other companies here that are in different industries, but in the technology-related spaces. So we think that's a positive sign. Fourth point is we've outperformed the country in growth rate for technology establishments. That means the opening of a new establishment. Usually on a typical year, just in software companies alone, we open up 300 to 400 new software companies. So there's a lot of growth in that area. And that's for a number of reasons. A lot of it makes logical sense. But if you look on this slide that I've provided you here, since 2007, Georgia's outpaced the nation in establishment growth, which I think is a good sign because we're opening a number of new businesses. Now, why do we do that? If you look at this chart, there's an inverse correlation between your establishments and your employment. So that makes some sense when you think about it. As companies downsize or merge or acquire, you have a lot of talent in those companies, and they may go out and open up another company. So there's some good and some bad with that, but there's Georgia, more than most states, has a good entrepreneur community, has lots of talent coming out of the universities, and there's always a number of new establishments provided. This particular slide shows in the software IT space. This next slide shows in the telecom, but as you see, they're almost exactly the same in terms of how they chart. So in 2009, establishments were up 8.8%. Unemployment was down 3.9%. This year, or 2010, we had 9% or 0.9% establishment growth and minus 0.9% employment growth. The Georgia Research Universities are a key attribute. I think you all know that, to the state's technology sector. We, again, going back to this primary research, we asked companies of less than 50 people, 50 to 500 people, and more than 500 people what was important to them about Georgia as a location to put their technology business, and every one of them ranked research universities as number one in that category, whether it was a small company or a large company. So we just want to be aware that that's perceived as, from our companies, as the number one asset, no matter whether it's a small company or a large company. They're looking for talent, and they need to find that talent out of the university systems, even though there's some statistics that show that too many of our university graduates move on to other states after they graduate. This next slide shows the best undergraduate engineering programs as ranking in that area, and Georgia Tech, of course, is ranked in that top 5 as 5th category. America's best graduate engineering program, Georgia Tech's ranked 4th. And here's an important slide. Our universities, as I think all of you know this, do a good bit of R&D. Just so you could see the slide, we actually cut off a number of the universities that are not shown here that also do research, like the Georgia States and other great colleges and universities in our area. But if you just look at Georgia Tech, Emory, and UGA, each year they've spent more on research, and which also means jobs and opportunities to build new businesses, find cures to all kinds of diseases, and now it's up to about $1.5 billion we're spending on research just from those 3 universities alone, so very significant. And if you just take Georgia Tech and what they spend on computer science, math, and engineering, they rank well ahead of MIT, for example, where you think that MIT might be ahead, but we've almost spent nearly double the amount in that particular area versus MIT, University of Texas, Stanford, University of Florida, and Duke. So now to a slide that's not as exciting, not as positive, certainly, and it's in the K-2 through 12 education program. So for recruitment and keeping our companies here, I would say that this is the number one factor if a company's looking to come here, that this is a number one factor that's a deterrent to consideration of our state. There's certainly other pros and cons, but if you look at this, we put the good news slide first, that U.S. Department of Education reported Georgia that in Georgia, 86% of the schools were rated as making adequate yearly progress, second only to Texas. We did, as you recall from prior years, those of you who were here, we compared to some benchmark states, California, Massachusetts, and Texas, because they all have significant technology presence, and then close by Florida and North Carolina, because in fact there are 2 competitors in this area, and we like to match up with them as well. And from a progress standpoint, we did well. But if you start looking at the SAT scores, and this slide, it wouldn't be new to you, but compared to the benchmark states, we're still at the bottom, even though we've made maybe one of the states that's made more progress. The scores are still low. And in math SAT scores, state ranking, we ranked 49th out of 50th. Now, some people say it's because we don't spend enough money on our education, but if you look at this next slide, it shows that compared to our benchmark states, other than Massachusetts, and you think about Massachusetts as certainly bullish on education, we're second in terms of expenditures. So as you all look and consider ways to improve the education system, you want to look at the issue that we do spend per student second most compared to our benchmark states.
Comment.
Yeah.
If you take in cost of living, Georgia's even ahead of Massachusetts.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We've got a question here, though.
Okay.
Yeah, Tino, I appreciate this.
Yeah.
I think the 49th out of 50th statistic is probably the most damaging thing about Georgia that's out there, about our SAT scores. It's been that way for a long time. A big part of that, and I'm not trying to be a defender that we have the best K through 12 system in the country, and I just want to make it public, and I think your organization can help market this. We test way more kids in the SAT than but the soundbite is 49th out of 50th. If you correct for the number of kids we test versus other states, our scores are more like in the middle of the country. Now, again, is that anything to be jumping off the roof and be super proud of? No, but it's not. We are not. I would guarantee we are not the 49th out of 50th quality public education in the United States. I can almost guarantee you that. And if you look at some of the other norm reference tests that are given to middle schoolers and high schoolers, we do come out in the 20s. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses. I know this 49th out of 50th kills us from a marketing point of view.
Right.
But, I might work and try to dredge up some of those other statistics so that when you present this, you can say there's another, maybe start getting the message out that's not quite that bad.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think that's right. I think there's a lot of different factors, and statistics are always things that need to be interpreted and considered. 49th is the soundbite that hurts us.
It kills us.
We do know that more of the students, almost all the students, I think, take the SATs here, which is the other side of the coin. So that factors in. Yeah. And then on the expenditure side, if you take expenditures, kind of account for that, number of students that take it, and where we rank, we need to be better, but we're not as bad as that particular slide shows. This next point is technology positions are at the forefront of Georgia's labor market. And this is, again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but we just came back from Washington, D.C. The president's staffers. And we actually announced yesterday was that Atlanta is, there's a new program at the federal level. There's no funding affiliated with it, but it's called Startup America. Some of you may have heard of that. And Atlanta is one of eight cities that have been recognized in the country on the tour that's going to be taken in terms of the potential or the current ecosystem that we have to grow our startup community. So I think that's a real positive. And they also see that, I'm talking about the federal level, that technology is going to be key for our country and certainly for the state of Georgia to kind of ride on the backs of technology to grow our community and grow our industries here in the state. So certainly I'm in a position that I would be probably trying to find the best components of what we're about here in technology. But the facts are the facts that even during the recession where the unemployment was 10%, in technology it was just about flat. We might have dropped 1 or 2% in terms of employment, but employment held their own in the worst of times here. So if you think about that and all the potential and all the different uses of technology, this is the kind of thing that we need to be standing up on their chairs and saying, let's think more about technology. And that's why Senate resolution that will be hopefully coming over to the House side, 68, that Marla at GTRI and TAG and others have been working on, we think is critical. Coming up with a plan for technology and science, a real strategic plan so we can look at, and it's not just about where we spend the money, but the whole thing about how we build an ecosystem here to support the growth of the technology community is critical. So we appreciate all your support here when it comes over to the House side, and we know we'll have that from you. But these are some of the hottest areas in terms of technology jobs: network systems, computer software, environmental engineering. There's a lot of jobs out there. It's too bad that in this school system there's not enough focus on educating our children when they're in middle school and going into high school, that you can be an engineer or you can be in the STEM area and have a great career. The salary and wages, as you all know, are much higher in this area than most areas, and so there's a lot of great potential. These are the areas that are expanding in in Georgia. There's a number of them that have, there's more jobs being placed here. Moving to broadband availability is a significant factor in determining where technology-based businesses choose to locate. So we, in the survey, again, the primary research survey, 72% of respondents rated bandwidth as an 8 or better in terms of importance, with 41% rating bandwidth as importance of 10. So we're working on that in the state. There's certain pockets where we don't have it, but for those areas where we have legislators that aren't fully covered, you're not going to do much with getting technology companies to move there if you don't have the bandwidth to support it. And that's the point of this slide. We, last count, we had 41, yes? Yeah.
Could you give me an update of how extensively Georgia is providing bandwidth? You said some areas not, and I really don't know where those are anymore.
Yeah, I think the coverage is over 90%, but I'd have to get Richie to, we don't have that number right here. We can get it back to you, but it's...
fair to say it's rural areas?
Yeah, rural areas.
South of
yes.
Bacon?
Yes, yeah. But very critical. You've got companies like NCR when they moved here. Of course, they have a plant in Columbus. They're in Peachtree City. They're here in Atlanta. We have an office in Savannah now. There's a lot of activity going on there. But there's places where there's not the possibility of these technology companies moving, even though they might have everything else there, including talent. We need to make sure we have the bandwidth there. But we can give you the specifics on that. Yeah.
Have bandwidth. It doesn't correlate in my mind that those are the area where there's talent or resources to put an IT IT company in it.
That's a good question. One of the things that there's a company, Indian company called Wipro. Some of you have probably heard of it. It was one of the 5 largest Indian staffing companies, I think, in the world. And they have a new strategy of bringing their more employment here, because those companies, I think, were oftentimes perceived, and reality is they're pulling jobs out of America into other countries. Now they're trying to actually establish offices here. They have a big office in Atlanta, and they're growing it, and they've identified a number of areas, rural areas, where they'd like to open up call centers, as an example. But they'll still need a degree of the bandwidth there to make that happen. But you're right. I mean, if you take you're kind of hitting me in one of the areas that I've always preached to as well, is a lot of times when in the economic development world they say, here's where the money's available to be spent. And it's always the reverse of where the businesses and the most opportunity are. To me, I was with a group of economic developers from around the country. I got to be on a panel, and I made that comment. I don't think it went over real well, but it is like, okay, we need to help this area, and it's like there's not anything there to support what you're trying to do. So let's take the middle areas that have potential. Let's get them strong. But I think as a state, you all want to make sure everybody has some opportunity to.
Final question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I know of a number of stimulus projects, particularly in your area on broadband. How much stimulus money did Georgia benefit from on broadband expansion?
There was an announcement in Savannah with a number, but I don't have that number, so that's another thing that we can get back to you and send that back to you. But I don't, we weren't the #1 state in terms of getting it, but there is some activity going on in that area. There's also, we had proposed, because there's one thing about putting broadband in areas, and then the second step is companies, people being able to use that.
Excuse us.
We just, little side note there, but it was considerable. The Northeast corridor got $32 million. Okay. I'm not sure the amount that came in the Northwest area. Yeah. And then, as you said, around Savannah and that particular area, they had a third batch of money. But so I would have, if the Northeast corridor is any indication as to the size, I would think that it had to be $60 to $70 million total, at least that amount.
I have a slide on data centers here. At last count, we had 41 major data centers, and these are facilities when you talk about cloud and virtualization and some of the terms that are relatively new. These facilities are becoming more and more important and valuable, and Georgia's in a great position. There was an article in, I think it was the Business Chronicle, that talked about how we're a perfect spot for data centers. We have good infrastructure. We also don't have as many of the catastrophes, earthquakes, the hurricanes, and things that knock companies out of contention, knock states out of contention for that. But the people we surveyed, 61% of their primary data centers were in Georgia, and then their backup centers, 36%. Which makes sense because usually they want to have a data center somewhere else in case there is an issue. Almost to the end here. Labor availability and quality are the most important attributes to technology decision makers choosing a business location. So it's all about the people. Do we have enough people? Do we have the right people? And this first slide shows how important the following areas were in terms of business location. And if you look in the green part, it says available labor and available talent were ranked higher than any other area, and then higher education system. So you had all three of those that tie back to the importance of labor. Oops. These are the areas that are most needed, critical to technology jobs: software application, project manager, management, web development. And then these are the jobs that are most difficult to fill: application developers, project management, business intelligence analysts. We did get to talk to all of the presidents of all of the tech colleges. Why am I blanking on the word? Our tech schools. And we showed them this slide. And we're encouraging the schools to look at the needs that we probably have 5,000 jobs open in these areas now that can't be filled. And we have companies like SecureWorks that just was purchased by Dell, major information security company here, that has 200 jobs open right now. And they said, we're going to fill these jobs here, or we're going to fill these jobs somewhere else. There's a company called SolidFire that was a growing company here. It was just announced yesterday or the day before that they're moving to Boulder, Colorado, because they couldn't find the talent here that they need. So even though we have a lot of talent, do we have the right talent? How do we match talent? And are our schools working towards filling those gaps for us? So it's something that we need to think about. And then finally, point number 10 is decision makers rated the climate for conducting technology business in Georgia a 6.97% out of, or 6.97 out of, on a scale of 1 to 10. And there's just a chart that shows that overall satisfaction, which we'd like to be higher. And this one varied. So if you look at the young companies, they're saying better funding, more options. And that may come from TAG is part of a group that is called Venture Atlanta. We help form Venture Atlanta. Our goal is to bring venture capitalists in from all over the country each year. Last year we brought in almost 100 VCs, and we showcased 40 of our technology companies with the idea that they come in and they're going to like what they see, they're going to come back and invest. And to some degree that's happening. But for the young companies, they're struggling. They have to bootstrap their business, and sometimes they go out of business even though it's a good potential because they can't get any funding. They can't go to the banks. They go to family and friends. The angel investment community isn't as powerful at this point in time. The VC community in Georgia, it has been shrinking and doesn't have the investment dollars. So that's key for the small companies. Your middle-sized companies say tax benefits and breaks. We need to get more granular on exactly what that means, and we can get back to you on some of that. And then it's interesting, the large companies say transportation and traffic solutions. So we thought that was kind of an interesting piece. So that's pretty much it for my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to answer any other questions or other information that you need that we can provide you. We may have some of it back in our other 280 slides.
Just one question. I mean, we're here about public education, but how do private schools in K through 12? How does that? Do you have any numbers or statistics on that? Comparing Georgia to the rest of the nation.
How Georgia's private schools compare to the rest of the nation?
And the volume.
Yeah, I don't have that today. We might have some of that. We can ask. Richie's taking notes here, so we'll make sure we check that out. Yeah, I think we work with some of the charter schools, like the Gwinnett Gwinnett Charter School for Technology, and they're very strong, well received. There's Tech High School here that actually TAG had a little role in helping to establish in Atlanta. And so some of the charters are doing fairly well. Some are doing really well. But I don't have any specific statistics on that today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question is always competition when you're in any business. It doesn't really matter what that might be. Of course, we know California is kind of the leading state as far as technology. Who is our greatest competition as far as the East Coast is concerned? Who are we competing with?
Close by, Florida and North Carolina. Further away, Virginia and Massachusetts. I would say those are the 4 states. We're trying to get some info, and California is way ahead of the game, and they probably always will be for the foreseeable future. Although, given some of their challenges out there, there's possibilities to recruit some companies here for the right opportunities. There's a company, I can't mention their name today, but talking to the president of the company, they have a major presence here, a company you probably would know the name. Most of their leadership is here, but their headquarters are in California. And the comment that was made to me was there's a couple tax benefits and tax laws there versus here, and if we ever change them, and I've asked them to give me this in writing and allow me to look at it, and if we ever change them, they said they'd move here immediately with their headquarters. So there's some opportunities to look at other places, but Georgia, with the universities, with the airports, with the entrepreneurial spirit, with a lot of the infrastructure like the data centers, with the clusters, if we ever focused on the clusters, there's a lot of potential to be in that top 5. Right now we're 11th. We have 13,000 technology companies and about 245,000 technologists. So we're a big industry. The Milken report came out, and Milken's something we look at, and we can get you that report as well. I think Marla has that, and we have that. But we've dropped actually to 24th in ranking, and they look at all different kinds of things. In 2002, we were 14th. Is that right, Rich? We were 14th, so we dropped from 14th to 24th. And so, some of that is about the ecosystem, but we definitely have the infrastructure that we need in a lot of ways with the port, the airport, and the other things I mentioned. So, but those are our competitors.
Have one other question. I'm far more familiar with the banking industry than anything else, and I know that as investors and entrepreneurs, as they begin to develop these new companies, sometimes the incentive for developing these new companies is to grow it to a point to sell.
Yes.
They're looking for the future within 8 to 10 years of selling. How many of those companies that you see they're developing in Georgia really have a different attitude? They want to grow their company and have that and retain that ownership here in Georgia.
That's a great question, and only anecdotally can I answer it. But I do, when you think about Georgia and what's happened in the past 10 years, I remember reading in one of the newspapers how one company was sold, and now here's the leading company, and then that company was sold, and then they had another, here's the leading company, and it went on, and it was companies like ISS sold to IBM, Scientific Atlanta sold to Cisco, and CheckFree sold to Fiserv. So those were the three that were considered leaders, and then they all sold. Now, the good thing about those three that I'd like to say for the record is they've all stayed here, and they've actually either maintained their base of employees or grown their base, like Scientific Atlanta. Now Cisco has built another building since that time. So it's not all bad, but we don't have any great stories, and I'm sure someone will correct me. There's probably some out there, but for companies that have gotten to that big Fortune 500 size that have just stuck it out and grown, and I would say maybe 20% want to do that. The other 80%, and it's probably the same. Well, it might not be the same. There's two things that I'm told, and this is anecdotal, that serial entrepreneurs here, they may do one or two companies and then they go do something else. Where in California and some other places, there's more of a spirit of this is what I do. We're going to do as many companies as we can. So you take a CBion, for example. CBion's a public company now. They came here from Florida with 3 people, and now they have 1,000, and they're here, they're growing. There's no talk of sale. Watch for the next few weeks, see if anything happens. But there's no talk of sale that we've heard, and so there is some of it going on, and that's a challenge that we'd like to have more of them stay here and grow. But even one of the things, and I said this last year when I was here, we did a survey 2 years ago that after 4 years we asked our companies, how many of you had more than 10 employees? And only 13% had more than 10 employees. And then we compared that with our sister organizations in California and Massachusetts. Of course, we picked 2 tough ones to compare to, and they were between 25 and 30%. So in California and Massachusetts, 25 to 30% of the companies that started 4 years ago had more than 10 employees, where in Georgia it was 13%. So that's really a material difference, and I think that's part of that's the infrastructure. And how do you help companies that are pretty good or really have a lot of potential that might have 5 to 10 employees become those gazelles and get to be these big companies? And so TAG is doing something called economic gardening, where we're working with them on specific things like market intelligence, which a lot of times companies scrimp on, staffing assessment, because they might have hired somebody that's a heads-down engineer, let's say, that they need to do sales now, but they don't have their team set up, and then strategic planning. So we're doing that at Savannah right now. If we had more funding, we'd do it at other places. That's a grant from the EDA that we've had to do that program, and we've worked with about 25 companies in Savannah. And over the course of a couple of years, we'll see how it works in terms of helping them to get to that next level.
And last question. You mentioned that California had some incentives as far as taxes is concerned, and you said that you might be able to supply us with what keeps them there and not move to Georgia. Not sure that we can do anything about that, but I would love to get a copy of that and see what they're offering those companies.
With this company, as soon as I came back to my office, because I was at a lunch meeting, I emailed the president and said, could you send me a white paper, 1 or 2 pages that would say what this issue is? And he's promised to do that, so I haven't gotten it yet. And when I get it, with his permission, I'll share it with everybody here, which was the goal of me getting it, to let you know what that issue is. One of the things that TAG wants to do more through our Government Relations Task Force and with our partners is to keep our antennas up and stay aware of what issues there are that prevent companies from growing here, prevent companies from moving here. We're doing a lot of good things, but there's always some things we can tweak and improve. You helped us last year with the angel tax credit. We're hopeful on that people are going to be getting off the sidelines and investing, so we need to find some more things that we can do that will differentiate us from the rest of the states, particularly those states I mentioned that are our competitors.
One last question from me, and that has to do with the policy study committee introduced over in the Senate that will be coming this way. Do you believe that the state of Georgia having a policy along this line is going to be conducive to more people wanting to move this way?
Are you referring to the strategic planning commission Senate resolution?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It will be. It's going to help over the midterm to create jobs and drive the economy. And the only reason is, and I said this at our dinner the other night. I referenced my YMCA experience in working with people that worked with gang members, trying to get them out of gangs. And my leader of that was a gang member that was found the right way to go. And he said to the gang members, he said, "A man without a plan plans to fail." And we can say the same thing about a state without a plan plans to fail, because there really is so much potential. Take a look at the clusters and the tax incentives and how to keep talent here and all those elements. So if we really have a group of leadership, of public and private leadership, that can sit down and interview people around the state and come back with a good compass, and GTRI and TAG are also working on looking at the other states, so we'll have that data and finding out what's worked and what hasn't worked with those states that do have plans, because a number of the states that are growing and successful have a plan in place. And used to be called a roadmap, but now in modern days it's called a compass, because you don't just go this certain road, but it's something to at least have a background to say, here's the 3 things or the 5 things we really need to make happen in order to grow the technology-based economy here in Georgia. So, yeah, absolutely, we're bullish on that. That's really the only thing that TAG is driving this year, and we're hopeful. And there's not any cost to it in the short term, so it's something that we thought might be a good year to bring this through and really get working on it.
Thank you very much for being with us this morning. We appreciate all you do. And
thank you.
And if we can be of help to you, please let us know.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Any other comments, questions? This meeting is adjourned.
Thanks.